Hi there, I am Johannes Keating. How about this background, eh? I'm actually having to conceal because we are doing some work around our home, but it ain't bad, eh? It's quite exotic. We were at a place like this a few weeks ago, me and my honey in Mexico. So, anywho, I hope that isn't distracting. Um, Today, we're going to get into the case of the corporate lawyer. It's from 1988. It's a Davanloo transcript, and it is mighty fascinating and interesting, at least if you are similarly inclined to me. I'll be just sharing my opinion, what I like, maybe what I would have done different. These are just my opinions. But yeah, when it comes to Davanloo, if you're not reading Davanloo, then you may question yourself. What are you actually doing with your life? What are you actually doing on this planet? I'm being facetious, of course, but yes, I love Davanloo, and so let's get to it. So the case of the corporate lawyer, I'm not going to read it line by line or even paragraph by paragraph, but we'll drop in at various junctures and I will, let's call it free associate. So here we have a backdrop where at the onset of the session, Davanloo has inquired into what brings her to therapy, and the patient is now sharing a vignette where a while back she was at a Christmas party where her boss humiliated her. Davanloo has now begun to needle her about how she felt, and this is on page 126. So, Davanloo, and how did you feel? Patient, stupid and embarrassed. Cover words. Therapist, no, stupid is patient. Stupid is a bad word. Embarrassed, really embarrassed. Therapist, what did you think? Patient, I was so humiliated, I didn't think at all. The word humiliated is nearer to a feeling, but it is still a cover word, as can be seen from the fact that it calls for a further question. What did you feel about being humiliated? Um, if memory serves, Davanloo goes on a bit here, pressing for what she felt. It's interesting that he doesn't ask how she felt towards the boss. I'm not sure why he didn't. I probably would have, since we're talking about a reactive feeling towards the boss for having humiliated her. But he lets her squirm a bit around this question of simply what she felt. I think it would have given the patient a bit of an assist to simply ask how she felt towards the boss. I think that may have expedited things, but what do I know? Therapist, it's not clear how you felt. Do you see that we are having difficulty seeing how you felt? Patient, I felt, my God. This exclamation doesn't say how she felt, though it may seem so. Therapist, being humiliated in front of 60 people, you must have had a certain feeling at that moment. Patient, isn't humiliation a feeling? Therapist, you are humiliated, but it's not clear how you experienced your feelings at that moment. Parentheses, pressure toward the actual experience of feeling. I actually think Davanloo is contributing to some lack of clarity and vagueness here. If he had simply said, how did you feel towards him for humiliating you? I think that would have been a lot clearer. But anywho, so patient, oh, I got very embarrassed. I put it away. I guess you had received like a dildo or something from the boss. I put it away and threw it in the garbage. And she smiles. Therapist, but still you smile. Patient, now I'm smiling, but believe you me that I was not smiling. Therapist, well, what was it then that you experienced? This is what I'm looking at. How did you feel being put in such a position in front of 60 people? Again, I'm just not understanding why he's not asking how she felt towards him. I liked here earlier, right? You see here when he goes, how did you feel? And then here, what did you think? And then Davanloo goes, now, what came to your mind? I'm trying to see what went to your mind immediately. Those questions are actually quite nifty and nimble in my mind. They go to the idea of casting a wider net to actually capture the entirety of the patient's experience, not just reactive feelings. So I think that's actually quite nifty and intelligent. Um, and so, but anywho, for some reason, he's not going for just how did you feel towards the boss? Patient, I tried to mask it. I tried to sort of say, oh, ho, ho, and laugh about it in front of everybody, describing not what she felt, but how she covered up her feelings. Therapist, but still you're not saying how you felt. You're humiliated in front of 60 people you work with, and then you have difficulty to tell me how you felt. How do you experience this? How do you feel inside? You mean, how do I react? Therapist, reaction, internal reaction. Patient, that's a very good question. I never thought about it before. She smiles. Therapist, you smile and say, patient, oh, I definitely wasn't smiling then. I smile now, but why are you smiling now? So you can see how Davanloo is now getting after the tactical defense of smiling in real time. So there's exertion of pressure to get clear on what she actually felt at that moment, which again, I've already belabored the point, but I actually think Davanloo is contributing to some vagueness himself by not actually asking how she felt towards the boss. But at any rate, there is that exertion of pressure. Defenses begin to crop up. Now, specifically the tactical defense of smiling, and Davanloo points it out. The patient's response illustrates how her defenses have gradually begun to become somewhat exhausted because she now introduces a word which admits to one of the most important feelings that she has been trying to avoid. Patient, probably because it's still an open wound a little bit. Like So the above passage demonstrates the face of systematic clarification and challenge towards the patient's defenses. And there's some degree of rise in the patient's transference feeling manifesting itself with the first signals, sighs, which indicates anxiety in the form of tension in the intercostal muscles. Therapist, you see, this is very interesting and we should look at it. Here's the situation in which you feel humiliated and your face is red, and then you talk about an open wound. That means you felt wounded then. Patient, of course I did. Therapist, but then what I'm saying is this: how did you feel being wounded? Again, I just think it would have simplified things if he had said, how did you feel towards him? But I am belaboring that point. Now on page 130, this is interesting. The patient is still in a state of resistance, and the therapist continues clarification and increasing the degree of challenge, pointing out to her that she's totally incapable, a challenge to the resistance in a woman who so prides herself in her independence and efficiency. The interview continues. I'm going to skip down just a little bit. Suddenly there emerges a crucial communication from the therapeutic alliance, giving evidence of further exhaustion of defenses and making clear both the presence of resistance in the transference and the form that it takes. Patient, can I open up? I've never opened up. These words of the patients also make it clear that she is strongly identified with her defense of distancing, that it is egosyntonic. The therapist notes this for future reference, but turns his attention first to clarifying and challenging the nonverbal signs that this defense is operating here and now in the transference. Therapist, and do you notice also you look somewhere else? You avoid my eyes. Patient, it's not intentional. Therapist, doesn't make a difference. Still you do. How do you account for that? A smile again. This is quite interesting. So when I set out to talk about this article, I was thinking mainly I would be talking about what I like, but I'm seeing a number of things that puzzle me, let's say. When the patient says, can I open up? I've never opened up. It seems to me, why not be more supportive of that? How about, yes, go right ahead. So, but I guess she was in a state of gaze avoidance, and so he opts for that. But, this brings out a question around how much do we want to lean into resistance and get after resistance and stay with resistance, as opposed to look for openings and just go for those openings. I would have probably been inclined to be a little bit more supportive of what sounded like a communication from the patient's depths. Now, on page 131, here, this is where I think it gets mighty interesting. The therapist returns to the incident at the party. Therapist, we have to see how you felt. Patient, angry, Therapist, you see, again, even when you want to use the word angry, you have to say probably, as if even when you want to use the word anger, you don't dare. Patient returns to her egosyntonic defense. Patient, probably because I've never expressed my true feeling to anyone about anything. And therapist, but still you're maintaining an incapable position. Patient, I'm not doing it intentionally. Therapist, that doesn't solve our problem. Patient, no, it doesn't solve my problem. Okay, this is interesting in and of itself. Davanloo is opting to frame the situation as our problem, meaning we are in this as a joint venture, whereas the patient is focusing on that it is her problem. So this is quite interesting. Obviously, when it comes to undoing the omnipotent transference resistance and so on, it's probably more important to really do what the patient is doing and frame it as the patient's problem. But what Davanloo is doing here about framing it as our problem and that we are stuck insofar as the patient is defended, Davanloo is leaning into the togetherness, the we-ness of the joint venture. And I think it speaks to the heart of what Davanloo was about, which was togetherness and emotional closeness and intimacy in a spirit of total and complete honesty. So let's press forward. Phase 4B, head-on collision with the transference resistance, including that maintained by the superego. So that means in the service of self-sabotage and self-punishment. The therapist now speaks directly to the patient's therapeutic alliance, mounting an assault on her identification with her own resistance and pointing out the self-defeating consequences that stem from it. Therapist, and our problem here, because let's face it, there are problems that you have, patient, obviously, therapist, obviously, okay? And then you are searching to get help for them, patient, that's right. And you are not coming on the will of your husband, patient, it's my will. Therapist, now if you remain here with me, helpless and incapable of seeing how you felt, then we wouldn't understand the problem and wouldn't get to the core of your problem. Patient, therapist. So then I would be useless to you, wouldn't I? Patient, in that effect, yes. Therapist, you leave me tonight, we say goodbye to each other, and then I am of no use to you. Patient, I don't know how to answer you. Therapist, but again, you move to the position, I don't know how to answer you. That's a helpless position. So here we are at page 132. I want to underscore how Davanloo is using we language and leaning into the idea that we are stuck, right? But it's interspersed with you have a problem. You came here of your own volition, right? But then we are stuck when you are defended. So like I said, I think it points to the heart of what Davanloo was about, which was about the closeness and the togetherness and the spirit of total honesty. And I also think that it underscores the idea that we can go overboard when it comes to a focus that this is the patient's problem and that the patient is stuck. Really, it's the two. It's the duo, the therapist and the patient, insofar as there's really a joint venture here, then really the team of therapist and patient is stuck. And so we are stuck as opposed to you. So now I'm at 134, page 134. Davanloo has been clarifying / challenging the resistance against emotional closeness. He's been crystallizing the idea of the patient's wall, really getting her to own the fact that she is putting up a wall, even if it isn't conscious. And now here, Davanloo is shifting the gears from the focus on the resistance against emotional closeness to the part of her resistance that's in the service of self-sabotage. So here he returned to a head-on collision, this time laying greater emphasis on self-sabotage, i.e. on the resistance of the superego. Return to phase 4B, head-on collision with the superego resistance in the transference. Therapist. And as long as you keep me behind a wall, patient, you can't help me. Therapist, then I would be useless to you. Patient, Therapist, now why an intelligent person like you goes to the whole trouble to come, but at the same time wants to defeat the purpose of this? Patient, well, there's no rational. Therapist, why do you want to sabotage this? And why do you want to make me useless to yourself? Patient, I don't want to sabotage it. Therapist, but obviously it is there. You said that looking to the eyes implies that I would get to know you. So then you don't want me to get to know you. Patient, I think you would probably be the first person that ever got to know me. So we're at 138, page 138. Davanloo has been very snug in his focus on the patient's resistance, vacillating between the flavor of self-sabotage, that he'll be useless to the patient, and the emotional distancing, the two obviously being very intertwined, but really going back and forth between highlighting the self-defeating nature of the resistance and how the patient is pushing away Davanloo, the therapist. And he has also moved the focus a little bit to the C, the current life orbit, really helping the patient see the origins of her resistance, helping the patient see what a pattern this is and how pervasive it is. Part of the reason it's so important to say things like, is it only here with me, or are you this way in other areas too? It pulls the rug out from the potential objection that the patient might have that, well, I'm not this way anywhere else, I'm just this way with you, therefore you are the problem, right? So by helping the patient see that this is a pattern and it's pervasive, it pulls the rug out from that potential defense. Unless it really is that way and the therapist really is the problem and you fire the therapist, and all is well, right? So anywho, page 139, I want to read this portion here. The obvious spontaneity and the whole atmosphere of the interview, the breakthrough of affect-laden grief and guilt-laden unconscious feelings indicates that her resistance has been weakened considerably. Taking into consideration that research protocol calls for partial unlocking, the therapist moves to the next phase. Yes, scratch that last piece. I just want to focus on the obvious spontaneity and the whole atmosphere of the interview. Apparently, there's been some breakthrough of affect and so on, but the marker of the patient's spontaneity and the atmosphere of the interview, Davanloo refers to that quite a bit throughout his transcripts. And I don't see that a lot in other transcripts with other clinicians. So that's interesting in and of itself, right? That Davanloo actually puts a good amount of stock on what he perceives as the atmosphere, the patient's spontaneity. And so keep that in mind, that whether or not your patient is spontaneous and the atmosphere itself, those are actually important markers. So this is not going to be a thorough analysis or discussion of this particular case. Really, I just wanted to introduce you to the case of the corporate lawyer. So in closing, as I'm wrapping up this discussion, I am thinking about how there was no major breakthrough of feeling in the transference. The patient acknowledged mixed emotions towards Davanloo, but there didn't seem to be a major breakthrough in the transference. Instead, there appeared to be an exhaustion of her resistance, in the sense that she was more and more open and honest and willing to acknowledge the truth of things. But there was no major breakthrough with a ton of sort of somatic pathway and that sort of a thing, as far as I could tell. Now, if you saw the video, maybe that's a different story. But in terms of what came through here in the transcript and the commentary, I can't say that it looked like there was a major breakthrough in the transference. And this does seem to represent a pattern in Davanloo's transcripts, where at a certain juncture, Davanloo will say things like, and the interviewer was satisfied with this response, and then he moves on. So it appears to be a matter of exhausting the resistance sufficiently to the point where the patient can be very open and honest and really acknowledge the truth of what she's thinking and feeling, without necessarily a major high rise of those feelings with the somatic pathways and all of that. So that's interesting in and of itself, that for a number of these transcripts, Davanloo seems to go for just exhausting the resistance enough where there's acknowledgement of the feelings, but no major breakthrough of the feelings, as far as I can tell, as far as I can tell. And the other thing is the step-by-step bringing the patient along with him. Like he's building a case. He's actually relying on logic, helping her see, this data point, that data point, and then he makes an inference. Do you see the connection here? Do you see how instead of having your feelings towards the boss, we see that you're in the dark about what you're feeling? Okay. There was one more point where I think Davanloo had a lost opportunity. The patient reported that her chief complaints had to do with difficulties sleeping and things of that nature. And as Davanloo is leaning into the idea that she's not in touch with her feelings, he didn't tie that to her chief complaints as much as I would have liked to see, as I would have done. I would have said things like, so we see that you're having tremendous difficulty experiencing what you actually felt, right, with your boss, right? Could that be connected to the problems that you came here for help with? In other words, your current state of mind, right, where you are struggling, accessing and identifying your feelings. Could this state of mind be a precursor to your symptoms, to when you become symptomatic and have a hard time sleeping? And I think there were one or two more items that she mentioned in terms of her goals, her chief complaints. So I saw that as a bit of a missed opportunity to actually connect the difficulty with feelings to her chief complaints. So there is that. But yeah, the step-by-step building a case, connecting points, making these inferences so that the patient can see with greater and greater clarity what is driving and perpetuating her presenting problems. The last thing that I'm going to speak to here, I find this interesting. This is how Dr. Davanloo conceptualized his psychodiagnostics. So with this patient, the picture was very mixed. She certainly suffered from character pathology, but in a sense, this was fairly circumscribed and consisted of a false self of efficiency designed to hide her vulnerability, together with great difficulty over expressing anger. Her false self was to a considerable degree egocentric. She identified with it. She didn't see it as a defense or a strategy. But it had indeed been very useful to her and had enabled her to become highly successful in her career and to make a reasonably good marriage. Correspondingly, there was no evidence for any serious pattern of self-sabotage throughout her life. I mean, she had become a successful lawyer after all. On the other hand, her false self had resulted in lack of closeness in all personal relationships, including that with her husband. All these mixed factors place her somewhere to the right of center on the spectrum of psychoneuroses, but still very far from the most difficult at the right hand end. So this is how Davanloo tends to speak about psychodiagnostics. All right, that will be all for today. I hope that this gave you at least a sense for the corporate lawyer and that maybe it inspired you to actually read the case. Till next time. Bye-bye.